Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you read 3 of Blossoms on a Poisoned Sea by Mariko Tatsumoto. In this read, we're seeing a lot of clashing, both physically, emotionally, probably spiritually as well.
Mm,
But one of the clashes that we see are the fishermen or the fishing people in the village go against the big conglomerate of Chiso.
mm-hmm.
In this, we see them stand up and fight for their rights, one of which includes a protest. A protest which does end up getting violent and causing a lot of chaos and, just damage, pain, hurt, all those things. In our current society, with everything the way that it is, we're likely to see more of this. And we've seen a lot of this. We've been to these. Protests aren't new. Protests are a way of trying to get a point across that the public is behind, but the big governing bodies aren't really getting.
Right. It's trying to get a point across to the authorities or the ones who are making decisions.
Yep. We have slightly differing opinions, though, on the overall concepts of peaceful protests versus protests that get a little bit more destructive.
Hmm.
I think this happened a lot when we were talking about the effects of the Black Lives Matter protests.
Hmm.
And from there, it just continues to go on with the most recent being with Gaza and the attacks there. And what we've seen are peaceful protests in a lot of places for campuses and college students just camping out, doing nothing but being attacked by the police. But we also see the other side where here in Portland, at Portland State University, there were people that took over the library. And I feel like this is what happens often is 95% of them were there to hold a peaceful protest, but there were people that ended up damaging the library, tearing things, like destroying history and books and things that other people now have to work to clean up that have nothing to do with the negative effects of Gaza. And for me, that just always has been too much. It's
Hmm.
been a way to hurt your own community. It's been a way to hurt your own people. Like I said, with Black Lives Matter protests, you were seeing buildings being burned down and store owners being affected. That didn't have the effect of what that protest was meant to be.
Hmm.
There is the idea of chaos and destruction helping to move a point, but I'm on the side of the people that need to live their daily life still and then go back to that store the next day and try to make and earn a living so that they can feed their own families.
I totally see where you're coming from, where it's the everyday people who have to pick up the pieces. But in the end, for example, with Portland State University's library, it was just stuff. It was stuff that would be replaced. It was stuff that could be replaced. Unlike the lives that can't be replaced by the bombs that our tax dollars are essentially unaliving.
Right. And I think this is where we run into that difference of opinion is for me, there should be another way that doesn't go through that method. I don't feel like people that are making these decisions in Congress or within Senate House, same thing, but people like that can actually create change really care if we destroy this library. I think it's for the media cycle, then they pick it up and they twist it and move it in a way that spins to their own narrative. And
Hmm.
yet we're all becoming pawns and pieces within our own self-destruction. Because I agree, the lives that are being affected in Gaza and being tremendously destroyed are not ones that are going to be replaceable and shouldn't be overlooked. It's more of a factor for me of does that equate to us having to cause more damage here and does that help us move the needle? With that, I don't have a solution. I don't
Hmm.
have another way of shaking these people who are making these decisions and making them realize what kind of damage they're doing, even by being indecisive on a day-to-day basis. But it's just hard for me to see the effects that it has on our community when we are attacking it with our own hands.
Mm. To the point that you're making, most of the protests that we've noticed are peaceful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, also, like you mentioned, the only thing that catches attention is when violence ensues. And something that you also mentioned, so kind of just putting the pieces together, it's not all of the protests that is riotous. It's not a monolithic being that's causing the riots or causing big movements. It's just an arm of the protest that's causing that kind of destruction.
Right. And I don't want to neglect the fact that a lot of the times it's not even the protesters that are leading to this kind of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Many, many times it is the police and the enforcement that ends up coming down and creating much worse situations and
Right.
hurting people. So it's definitely not the protests that are the problem. It's select few individuals and growingly more and more systemic that are creating these issues of putting these neighborhoods that we should be continuing to build each other up with, and instead we're pulling each other apart.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way I think about it is where my mom's side of the family comes from Korea, it's a smaller countryside, so there's still small neighborhoods, but everyone knows each other and no one would go into another person's home and damage it. That
Mm-hmm.
would be just ridiculous thinking. Everyone there is trying to make a living. Because we're in a city, it's obviously different because these buildings that we have aren't someone's individual property. It's
Mm-hmm.
conglomerations, it's
Mm-hmm.
corporations. But to put that factor of only attacking the corporations hasn't been the thing. It's been local shops, plant
Mm-hmm.
shop owners, hairstylists, like shoe stores, especially. Like these places are the ones being destroyed. So it's not us taking down McDonald's. It's actually us hurting the person that lives right next to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I hate the idea of how protests are going. I don't hate protests. I think protests that they're doing on, like I said, the campuses, on lawns and marches, things like that are amazing. And the people that are willing to withstand that for the rights of other people are extremely beneficial and necessary. And if we look at history and look at past issues like Vietnam, we see the benefits that these have. I just have an issue with hurting the people that you stand next to and that you eat with.
For sure. And this is not to say that those who are marginalized cannot decide for themselves. When resistance is felt in a community that's been oppressed for a long time, they can choose to be more active and more violent. So we're not taking away anyone's autonomy, we're not taking away anyone's agency. We're just mentioning that the issue is when the community at large is affected.
Right. And these are just my own thoughts. You have the differing opinions on this, and it's something that we have kind of just agreed upon that we think differently in these
Mhm.
instances. It comes from different backgrounds, it comes from different life experiences. Like you said, it's not us telling you how you should react or telling other people how their reactions are correct or incorrect. It's more just saying my personal thoughts on this and then obviously your thoughts on the other side of it as well.
Yeah.
These are all trying times, as it was for these Fisher people
Mm-hmm.
and their struggles with what they have. We are approaching what I think is an imminent struggle as well with the end of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're someone that needs help with that and needs someone to reach out to, we always try to provide these kind of resources, and our recommendation for this week is going to be one of them. So we'll go into our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Dr. Therapinai. Dr. Therapinai is a Pinay therapist, Pinay meaning Filipina, who hosts the online space and directory Therapinexy, which is the premier online space for Filipina, Filipinx, Filipino wellness, mental health resources, and collective care. You can learn more about Dr. Therapinai's work through her website at therapinay.com. That's THERAPINAY.com. And you can find them on Instagram at Dr. Therapinay. That's again THERAPINAY. You can also find the directory on Instagram at Therapinexy. That's THERAPINXY.
Yep. And that's going to be our recommendation for the week. All right. I felt like our beginning topic kind of goes into the vibe of our read.
Mm-hmm.
So this was our third read of Blossoms on a Poison Sea by Mariko Tatsumoto. We have just read through pages 169 through 256, which were chapters 21, Sister Won't You Turn Over, through 31, Riot. What have we learned up till this point?
Up to this point, we watch as Yuki and Kiyo develop as characters. Yuki matures as a young adult, while Kiyo, on the other hand, becomes a more rash and childish individual. We also witness how their friendship starts to blossom into love.
Yeah, and before we get into the discussion of our read, I think we should mention some of the trigger warnings.
Yes, a couple trigger warnings ahead of time. First, there's a suicide attempt in this section, as well as death ideation.
Once again, the mood and vibes are not great. They're a little serious, they're a little down, but that's the world that our characters are in.
It's kind of the world that we're in right now.
Yeah. So let's start off with something actually sweet, and that's Kiyo. Kiyo has consistently been this very kind character, especially to Yuki, and he does want to change the world for good. But specifically to Yuki and her family, he is trying to make sure that they're able to stay alive and
Mm-hmm.
providing nutrition, getting groceries, doing everything that's possible to make sure that this family has what they need because Yuki's parents aren't able to work. They
Mm-hmm.
also have this brand new baby that they need to feed, and Yuki is working her butt off, but she's not able to find the jobs that really pay well because she's still in high school and as of now, not a high school graduate.
Exactly. And to see the weight of the moment, Keo is not only buying groceries with his own allowance, but he's also sneaking food outside of his own pantry under his parents' noses to give the food to Yuki's family.
Which eventually leads to an issue because Fukuzawa, who's the chauffeur, finds out,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not really the issue. He's actually trying to help out more.
Mm-hmm.
But then Kiyo's mom finds out and she just blows up and fires the cook because she knew about it the whole time. I think she was even considering firing Fukuzawa if Kiyo didn't stand up at that moment and kind
Mm-hmm.
of really make a stand on the fact that he was the one that had created this whole situation.
Right. And Yanagia, the cook, even though she knew what was happening, I think she's also like Fukuzawa, who's like trying to turn a blind eye just so that whatever is happening is helping somebody else.
It's probably because they're both coming from a place of less means.
Mm-hmm.
So when they see someone who has even less means, they are understanding of that situation. They know how hard it is to work, how hard it
Mm-hmm.
is to get money. Whereas when we see the life of Kiyo and his parents, we don't see one that is associated with hard work, I guess. I mean, his dad is constantly working. We see that affecting him. But
Yes.
his mom, on the other hand, we don't hear much about her besides the fact that she's just home, maybe just going out and doing other things, but she's not in the space where she is working her tail off to get money. And so I think for her, that is of less value and it's much more the morality of the situation that she can only focus on.
Mm-hmm, definitely. The only thing we know about Kiyo's mom is that she likes to incorporate American traditions into her family as well as the westernized fashions from the magazines.
Which gives me a lot of Housewives vibes. And
Mm,
not just like a person who is a housewife, but the television reality show like Atlanta Housewives or Orange County Housewives. Is that? I
the
think
Real
that's
Housewives.
the Real Housewives. She gives off Real Housewives vibes.
Yes, absolutely.
The struggle with food for Yuki's family, however, is kind of the start of everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much worse things that are continuing to happen to Yuki's family. One of which is just a representation of how her family is being shunned as they're walking through town.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just her family, it's anybody that's a fisherman or fisher person. Is that, I think that's
That's right.
a person that fishes,
A fisher.
a fisher from that village, and they are being outcasted. They're being yelled at. They're being told that they are not worthy of the things that they're asking for. But people don't really understand what's going on with their situation.
Right. And they're also being told that the money that they're working for is going to taxes, which is then going to these families who have the disease, and they feel as though they're a burden to society when in actuality they're not the reason why money is going away, because there's very little money going to these families in the beginning.
Yeah, and the townspeople are also concerned that with these protests, they're shunning away visitors. They're gonna possibly have Chiso move, which is gonna take money away from the town.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not thinking about the fact that Chiso is actually just poisoning that town consistently.
Yeah.
Within the scheme, we see the continued breakdown of what's happening to Yuki's family.
Mm-hmm.
We see the parents both going through more and more health degradation, and we also start to be able to realize what's actually happening to her sister, Tomoko.
Yes, we come to a scene where a doctor named Harada Masazumi and a reporter who follows him around, Ishimura Michiko, finally diagnoses Tomoko with Minamata disease, even though it presented as cerebral palsy earlier on.
Yeah, and this is something that they are now going to try to utilize to get a little bit more finances and some reparations from the government.
Mm-hmm. And Michiko in particular is trying to get the word out not only to the government, but to the public in general, no matter how much pushback she's getting from the editors and the publishers themselves.
Yeah, and she's doing this because of how pervasive this Minamata disease is.
Mm-hmm.
We're also seeing the effects of the individual lives that are starting to be haunted and torn down by the effects of the slow process of this. They
Yes.
talk about how people are no longer willing to take on the slow nature of it or become a burden to the family. So they're doing things that are very drastic. But honestly, in a society where they're not going to get a lot of money, they are probably seeing this as the best option for how they can move going forward.
Not necessarily themselves moving forward, but their families moving forward.
Right. Because when we think about the past encounter with Yuki's friend, that high school friend
Yeah.
that ended up running away from the family, we
Mm-hmm.
see the effects and burdens that it has on caregivers. And
Right.
as a person and individual, you probably don't want to put that onto your loved ones.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
In particular, within Yuki's family, one person who carries this burden is Nobuyuki, who is Yuki's father. Now, this is that content warning we were talking about. So if you need to, shut off the podcast or fast forward for about a minute or so. But what we want to talk about is Nobuyuki and his attempt at suicide when Yuki was out trying to get more money.
Right. He felt so much shame that his oldest daughter had to take on the burden of caring for the family and dropping out of school as a result.
Yeah, it is an overall small scene within everything that we're looking at, but that moment felt so big and it almost made time stand still within that book.
Yes.
I think that through these experiences, Yuki is really being forced to pick herself up and grow, which is such a hard portion for her to handle. I think it's maturing her more than she's ready to mature.
Right. And for me, what was more heart stopping for this scene is that Yuki herself was the one who discovered her father and discovered him on time, being able to cut the rope and assist him with breathing again.
Right. Going into our next trigger warning with death ideation, because Yuki, I don't think, is taking this in a bulletproof kind of manner.
Right.
This is all seemingly eating away at her mental health and probably
Mm-hmm.
her sanity, because we also see a moment where Yuki is holding her sister and is considering trying to make her sister's life easier by possibly drowning her within the ocean that they're sailing in.
Right.
She doesn't. So she does not go through with that. And that's because of this very happy moment that we see from Tomoko, where she giggles and it sparks that little bit of light
Mm-hmm.
that opens up the reality that all of the stuff that's happening to her isn't the end mortality. It's just this really crappy journey that she's on right now.
Right. Like you said, she's finding this moment where weakness comes up, but it's weakness that we understand because she's burdened with so much and she has to scrounge around and figure out what to do for the entire family. She is now the head of the household.
Right. This was kind of, I think, the bulk of this read.
Mm-hmm.
It was the journey that Yuki and her family is going through. It is the presentation of the other side, where if you're living in a social status that isn't the lower class,
Mm-hmm.
you're not really seeing the full picture. The representation of the townspeople is very familiar to what you hear on a daily basis of how people describe other people that are not doing well. So, people that are surviving off of welfare, people that are surviving off of lesser means, that are
Right.
just trying to get by for their family.
Mm-hmm.
They're described as lazy, they're described as trying to mooch off the government. They are demeaned into a class that is less than human
Yes.
without the
Unfortunately.
knowledge of what is actually happening, without the knowing of Yuki's parents not being able to work,
Mm-hmm.
with Yuki working as many jobs as she possibly can, but not being able to make the means. This seemed like such a good representation of how our society is currently pointing fingers at each other.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that makes me so angry when I was reading this was when some of the townspeople are saying, "Oh, you're faking it." I'm like, who would want to fake poverty?
Mhm. Within physical therapy, some of the patients that I see are workers' compensation patients or people that are on Medicaid, which is a system of healthcare that's provided for people that are paying at lesser rates.
Mm.
I remember when I went through school, there was a whole thing of always trust your patients, always believe in what they're telling you,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's pain, whether it's their story. And at first, it didn't really click in, and I saw other physical therapists treating patients and they were kind of jaded. They were
Mm.
like, oh, they're just working the system, especially in workers' compensation cases. They're like, oh, they're just trying to like get as much money as they can. As I've been working longer, I actually really enjoy working with both of those clienteles because there's such a need. And there's always this thing of, oh, they're trying to get this or they're trying to get that. So if they've been in the system for a while, it's like, well, she just hasn't been working for a long time. So she's clearly just trying to get social security benefits or disability checks and things like that. And it's like, well, how about we just look at the whole story? So this look at people with disabilities and the stuff that you were saying about what the townspeople were saying is, I think you're exactly correct. It's so frustrating because you're passing so many judgments on people without even asking any questions.
Right, and usually it's not their fault anyway. It's
Right.
not their fault that they're impoverished. It's not their fault that they're hurting, and it's not their fault that they're disabled. It's the system that's causing this.
Right. Not to mention, we should be helping others. It's within every religion, if that's what you want to believe. And I think it's within our human nature where we should be helping others. That's how societies should survive. If we
Mm-hmm.
don't, what are we doing? Just live by yourself in the woods.
Right.
So, this is such a frustrating part that I think Yuki is taking on very well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you may ask, where is Kiyo? There's not a whole lot of Kiyo in this read. There are bits and pieces where he is helping out Yuki's family,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get this end story with Kiyo. Not
Right.
his end, just where we leave off is with Kiyo.
Right. We did mention up at the top that there was a little bit of frustration and protest that was happening, and this is it. Fishers and the Minamata Fishermen's Cooperative were at this legislative office waiting to get an answer from the Diet, which was Japan's national legislature from Tokyo. However, because it took so long for any decisions to be made in favor of the fishers, that's when they got riled up. That's when they felt like they had to take things into their own hands and they went back into Chiso's offices and started rioting.
Yeah, and this involved the breaking of doors, windows, throwing things out other windows, hurting the people in those offices as they're
Mhm.
both in them and trying to escape.
Right.
The next step that happened seems to be the most frequent pattern with riots, and that's the police getting called. The police come in and create more chaos.
Mm-hmm.
They are, without abandonment, going and tackling anybody that they deem as a rioter and throwing them in their truck. One scene that we see is Yuki getting knocked over and a person with seemingly more wealth and prestige being able to get by without any kind of punishment. because of his status compared to Yuki's.
Right.
Then we see Kiyo being grabbed and thrown into the back of that van, and that's where we leave off with this read.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, what do you see happening from here? So let's go straight into predictions because this seems like a good leaving off point for where Kiyo's story is.
Mm-hmm. I think that Kiyo's just gonna get a slap on the hand, and I think most of the wrath and rage are gonna come from his parents.
So he'll probably get out of jail pretty quickly.
That's what I'm thinking because of his ranking as the son of the Chiso leader, a Chiso person.
Yeah. And to be honest, he didn't really do anything wrong. He
Mm-hmm.
was trying to go in to save his dad.
Right.
So he wasn't really a part of the riots, and he kind of got scared as the riots were starting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think he should get off. I don't think he was meant to be within all of this.
No.
I do think that this continues to play an effect onto Kiyo's views on his father and Chiso,
Mm.
because we had gotten to a point within this read that Kiyo was looking at Chiso as a better company because of that filtration system that they had invented,
Yeah.
which I think we're now realizing, hopefully, we're all realizing that that was complete BS.
Mm-hmm.
So this is probably where that turn is taken, where Kiyo maybe departs from his family. I'm thinking he might run away from home. It's probably going to be a life of him and Yuki. And with Yuki's paintings being consistently reported as something that's amazing, I'm assuming that that's what's going to help them get by.
I didn't think about that. I was considering what the paintings would become, but you're right. It's mentioned every time that Kiyo goes to Yuki's home. It's mentioned every time something bad is going to happen, like the paintings or the drawings are this lifeline. So it can definitely be a lifeline for the family.
Yeah, and if we think about what the paintings are, is that they're drawings of hope, they're drawings of
Mm-hmm.
life. So in my guess, I'm thinking that that is what it truly becomes, is it becomes life for them. It
Mm.
becomes a way for them to get out. And what we see is that Kyo and Yuki from that first chapter that we see them in the present, because all of this stuff is in the past. But when we see them in the present, we see that they're living pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that the paintings and the artwork, which Kyo has always invested in and always
Mm-hmm.
believed in,
Mm-hmm.
ends up coming back to give him good, to give him karma or that good vibes.
The full circle moment.
Yeah. We'll see as we get into our fourth read, which are pages 257 through 334, chapters 32, Arrested, through chapters 37, The Life of a Maid. I'm curious where other people are with this read. It's a dark read, but I don't feel like I'm in a dark place.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if people are in that same place. I mean, I definitely feel areas of frustration as I'm reading with how the Chiso group and the government and the people are treating each other.
Yeah. We're treating the Minamata Bay residents.
Right. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you have any, how can people connect to us?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or you can join the conversation on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Yep, and we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, which has our bookshop that has books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye!